Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Patrick Johnson from Sydnexis, and we're going to be speaking about what happened with Sydnexis and the FDA on the Myopia Podcast.
Welcome to the Myopia Podcast, where we give you the latest myopia research, clinical topics, and industry insights. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all awesome myopia content. And now to our host, a massive myopia manager himself, Dr. David Kading.
Are you finding that being a business owner in optometry is getting tougher and tougher every single year? Here's the tough truth. For every hour that we spend with patients, we spend 2 hours on administrative work, from charting, working with our team for prior authorizations, inbox messages, and so forth. In fact, up to 70% of our team's time is non-clinical, and patients are feeling this disconnect. I've worked with virtual staffing for over 10 years, and when we started implementing virtual team members into our practice, it changed everything. And then when we found team, everything changed. They helped us choose and support the right people. Now a virtual team handles documentation, prior authorizations, patient communication, phone calls, and scheduling. For more time with your patients, more energy for your team, visit hireteam.com. That's HIRETEEM.com, hireteam.com, to get you back in your practice in 2026. Well, thank you again for joining me. Again, my name is Dr. David Kading, and I get the lovely pleasure of practicing in Seattle, Washington with the Myopia practice, and have got to know my friend Patrick Johnson over the last 2 years, I think, a little better as he's more in-depthly come into the myopia space, having worked hard behind the scenes. So it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. If you have not gone back and heard Patrick's other podcasts that he did with me or seen them in the Myopia Files, he really dug in for us on the history of atropine and a better understanding of kind of where we are at. We'll touch on that a little bit in this discussion today. But also, if you want some more meat to the game, those podcasts are really, really rich. I think you did a great job on those. So thanks for hanging out with me again on the podcast, buddy. It's glad to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm always honored to be on your show. It's a great show. So it's a great opportunity to connect again. Yeah, nice to see you.
Thank you. So, Patrick, you work at a company called Sydnexis, and why don't you tell us a little bit of your role internally at Sydnexis?
Yeah. So we've been working here at Sydnexis for a long time now. Our goal has been to develop a product, a low-dose atropine product to treat myopia progression in kids. And we recognized a long time ago through a series of doctors that came to us and said, we've been prescribing compounded low-dose atropine to kids, and we're seeing this variability in effects. They're seeing some kids dilated, some kids not. So they recognized a long time ago that there was a formulation concern around some of the compounded products that were being used. And so we took it upon ourselves a long time ago, back in 2015, to try to develop a product that we could potentially commercialize in this space. And so fast forward to where we are today. I'm the president of Sydnexis. I've been intimately involved in all of the development activities here at Sydnexis over the past almost 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. And we undertook the largest clinical study that was ever conducted in the myopia space, enrolling 850 kids, and it was a 4-year study. So that's a very long period of time. It took 2 years to enroll. So we've been at this single task, developing this study for a very long time. So my role has been to really to make sure everything happens properly, from the manufacturing to the regulatory interactions to the clinical development. So I've had my hand in just about everything. It's been very rewarding. It's a really interesting process, especially when you run a study that lasts this long and it spans over multiple administrations and multiple events, COVID being one of them that's happened. So it's been a very interesting journey along the way. Yeah.
So you obviously have been in your study running things through with the drug. You've got SYD 101 is, I believe, what you call your drug right now, and we're excited to someday hopefully see a name. You've got a name for this product elsewhere in the world. But we have not got approval here in the United States. We'll talk about that in a moment. What is it? How is it different? Why can't I just compound? And we can dig a lot deeper into that with some of our prior podcasts, but just briefly, what is it?
Yeah, I alluded to the fact that the reason why we started this whole program in the beginning is because there was this inconsistency in formulations that doctors were coming to us and saying that they were seeing in their patients. And so we did some investigation into atropine. It turns out when you dilute atropine down to the low levels that doctors are using it at 0.01 to 0.05, when you dilute it down at those levels, it becomes highly susceptible to degradation. And so what we did was we did a lot of work behind the scenes to try to understand how do you come up with a formulation that you can stabilize, it doesn't break down very fast, but also retain its efficacy. Because the number one tool that we have to try and stabilize low-dose atropine is dropping the pH of the solution. It turns out that actually hurts the efficacy. So you really want to try and maintain this higher efficacy or this higher pH formulation that's comfortable and that's efficacious, but also stable. And that's very important when you're using a product chronically in kids.
And shelf life is also fits into that, right? And the stability of this. And I know you told me one other time that the FDA requires a shelf life for a period of time. So you're not just getting a product that, passes the mustard and clinically is effective, but it also has to stay on the shelf for a longer period of time than normally atropine could.
That's right. That's right. Our goal has really been to develop a premium product. I mentioned how we had this very long study that we've been working on, a 6-year study, essentially, between enrollment and execution. And so you really only get one chance at studies like that. You don't get a chance, let's go back and run another 6-year study. So our goal has been to develop a real premium product in this space, a product that has stability and the associated shelf life. And so our goal has been to get a 3-year shelf life, which is pretty rare in a topical ophthalmic drop that's maintained at room temperature. But we've achieved that through our unique formulation, all the work that we've done on it. And so at launch, when you launch a product, you typically don't have all the history of the in-use, they call it in-use shelf life. But we expect to be able to get a 3-year shelf life on this product a year or so after launch. So we're really excited about that. The tough part is just getting the approval in the US here.
Yeah.
So
the approval has come elsewhere in the world based off of your data that you have finished with this 6-year study. But you didn't enter into this without an understanding of what the FDA would require you. You went to them and said, what do we need to do, particularly because this is a new in class. We don't have a medication for myopia in the pediatric space. So what does a process look like for the FDA approval? Like what do they tell you? Hey, here's what this looks like. And I'm somewhat asking, what does a regular pharmaceutical in the eye care space approval process look like? And then what did they tell you, because this was a new in class, that you needed to accomplish?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a whole process, and it's a whole department in the company, the regulatory group, and there's a whole process that you go through with each regulatory authority, the FDA, the EMA, whichever groups you're talking to. And in the US, the FDA requires that you meet with them, and then the process is to have a number of discussions with them so that you come to agreement on what the study will look like, on how you analyze the data in the study, and most importantly, what a primary endpoint, the most important part of the ability to get an approved drug is to meet your primary endpoint. And so you definitely want to go into a big study like this with an agreement in the FDA on, okay, what's the bar we have to hit? What's that primary endpoint? And if we hit it, are we expected to be approved? And they'll never say, we're going to approve you if you hit that. But the reasons why they typically sometimes hold back an approval if you hit the primary analysis are more to do with safety concerns. And so they run a risk benefit analysis, and they say, is the benefit worth the risk? And if there is some risk, if there are safety signals that you see in your study that pop up, maybe expected or unexpected, if those safety signals pop up, then they start evaluating the risk benefit. But in our study, there were no safety signals. We've had a very, very clean study, as the FDA acknowledged. And so when we hit our primary endpoint, which we had agreed upon with the FDA, in fact,
are
if
you
you
able
look
to
at,
say what that was? Are you able to say
yeah,
what the primary
yeah,
endpoint was?
I was just going to mention it. It's kind of it's a unique endpoint. It's not something that a lot of clinicians would think is very normal in our
Mm-hmm.
area. So the drug division of the FDA wanted us to conduct an endpoint, a primary analysis using spherical equivalent. And the endpoint they gave us was the proportion of patients between arms. So we have a placebo arm and a drug arm that achieve a certain amount of myopia at 3 years. That was our primary analysis, 3 years. And so the endpoint itself was the proportion of patients between arms, between the drug and the placebo arm, that hit 3/4 of a diopter of myopia progression at 3 years. So we measure the number of patients in the drug arm that have that, and we measure the number of patients in the placebo arm that hit that threshold, and then we compare them. And if they're statistically significant, then that is a binary outcome. It is a yes/no outcome as to whether you did what you were asked to do. And in our case, we hit it. We met that threshold successfully, and we hit the endpoint. So
So you
again,
then had this PDUFA date back in October, I think it was.
yeah,
And so you submitted through, you said, here's our safety data. You put these approvals through elsewhere in the world based on the other different requirements. You continue to get approval. You've got European approval. I think you've got UK approval,
yep,
if
yep.
I'm right. And so this is all rolling out. Seeing that you had hit the endpoint with the FDA, the kind of thought process was we're likely going to get approval here, but then you didn't. And I think it left so many people scratching their heads as to what was it? What was it that you didn't tell us when we've, heard from you that left this back? Like, what was the zinger? Like, oh, here's where you missed it. And you didn't have one. Yeah, I haven't heard
No.
one yet. So what has kind of been the explanation that you have understood at this point of why you set the primary endpoint? It was a binary yes or no, as you said, and then the endpoint came and went. So where do you guys stand right now with your understanding?
So there's a little bit of tea leaf reading here, right? Because in the CRL, the letter that they sent you, they
CRL,
didn't
what's that?
the complete response letter, and that's
Okay.
a type of answer they give you when you submit for approval. They either approve you, they delay your approval, or they delay the review, or they give you what's called a complete response letter, and that says at this point in time we're not able to approve the product. And then they're supposed to tell you about why in the letter. And in our letter, they state that the product was not clinically meaningful, and they didn't think that the result was robust enough. And so that's why you have a primary endpoint that's a yes and no question. So you don't have to look at the data and say, well, it's kind of good, it's okay. The analysis that we had was, here's this 3/4 of a diopter threshold, and then you run the statistics between the arms and you say, did it meet that threshold? And the answer was yes. And so when you look at our first secondary endpoint in the study, that first secondary endpoint was one that doctors know very well. It's annual progression rate. And we hit that with an incredibly high p-value. So we hit the one that they gave us, which was the yes no answer. And then we also, I like to say, knocked it out of the park with the annual progression rate with a very, very high p-value. So when you do that, that's telling us more about the clinically meaningful result, which is, well, on this, because the endpoint we got, as I mentioned, is a yes no. That's a binary endpoint. But a continuous endpoint, which is something that you measure over time and it's relative, those types of endpoints are very informative. And when you run the statistics on them, if you get a good p-value, it tells you it's highly clinically significant. And so we did that. We met those endpoints. But what the FDA didn't do, and this is really the reading of the tea leaves, is they didn't really dig into the data to look at what we actually did. What we did was we ran the largest study ever conducted in this space, 850 kids. We went to the FDA initially and said, we want to run a study with 6 to 12-year-olds. And the FDA said, no, we want you to run a study with 18-year-olds. And we said, well, 18-year-olds don't progress too much. And they said, yes, they do. And we said, okay, well, let's work with you on this. So we ended up enrolling some older kids in the study. We enrolled 13 and 14-year-olds who at the end of the 4 years would be 17 and 18 years old. And it turns out that, as we expected and as we knew and as the industry knows, the kids we enrolled that were 13 and 14 years old at the beginning of the study didn't really progress too much through the course of the study. And so when there's little progression, there's little room for improvement. Now, I mentioned this word regulatory science at the beginning of the discussion here, and that's where you work with the FDA to come up with an endpoint that you think you can meet that's clinically meaningful. And we knew that if we enrolled these 13 and 14-year-olds, we'd have to enroll more patients in our study. And we did that because we would have to be able to create a statistics that would support approval, because we knew the 13 and 14-year-olds wouldn't really progress that much. And then it would be hard to bring them back. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the detail, but not too much. If you have a 0.75 diopter threshold at 3 years, those 13 and 14-year-olds in the placebo arm, most of them didn't go above 3/4 of a diopter, right? So it's really hard to bring them back if you don't go over that. So again, that's kind of an idea of how you can hurt the statistics by enrolling patients that aren't going to really improve or get worse, so you can't improve them. So that's the regulatory science part of how you enroll a study, and based on the endpoint you agree with the FDA upon, you've got to enroll accordingly. So anyways, when we removed those 13 and 14-year-olds from the study, which we had actually had as a pre-specified analysis, the data gets even better. And when you go to the younger patients, the youngest patients, that's where the data works exceptional. The drug works exceptionally. And when we enroll a fast progressor population, if people are familiar with the myopia literature, they'll look at what's called the LAMP study. It's a study that was conducted over in Asia. And they enrolled in their study a fast progressor population. And that means a patient that progresses a half a diopter in the year before they enroll in your study. We had that as a pre-specified group that we enrolled. And that was the group where our drug worked the best, was in the fast progressor group. So what the FDA didn't do when they gave us this complete response letter, they didn't take the time to dig into the data and understand where this drug is really working the best. And it turns out it works the best in the patients that need it the most. Young kids and kids that are progressing fast.
The ones we're seeing and doing myopia treatments.
The ones that are most likely to become high myopes. That's right.
Yeah. I think clinicians would probably have agreed with you on that assessment of who should be in the study as well. And 13, 14-year-olds, we probably would have agreed with you. So what's next? Like, what's the next move? I think everybody kind of wants to know, like, does this mean atropine's not going to ever get approval? Does this mean that there's more conversations to have? Does this mean that we need to be writing letters? Like, what does this all mean for the future?
Yeah, so I'll go through a couple different stakeholders here. What it means for the company is that we have a lot of work to do and work with the FDA in order to try and continue to get this drug approved. There's an appeal process that we can go through that says, wait, you guys didn't look at this data the right way. You need to look at this data the way that we asked you to look at it. And so that's where the company goes through. And that's what we're going to be doing. And unfortunately, that costs us a lot of money and a lot of time, and it gets a lot of our investors very nervous. But I think the more important stakeholder groups here are the patients and the parents and the kids and the clinicians. And what it means for that stakeholder group is that it's unlikely that there will be an atropine approved if ours doesn't get approved going forward. And the reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, you don't really get a second chance to run a 6-year, very, very expensive study. No one's going to look at this whole process that's happened with low-dose atropine in the last, call it 2 years, and say, boy, that's an area that I want to go into and spend a lot of money and wait 6 years only to receive this very uncertain response from the FDA when they tell you this
Right.
is what you should do. And then you do it and then they don't approve you. And then they don't look at your data. So that's the tricky part right there, is that this ruling likely means that there won't be a low-dose atropine product approved by the FDA. They don't seem to really believe that this is an unmet medical need. They don't see, they probably don't appreciate the fact that there are what we estimate and others estimate to be over 1 million compounded prescriptions written each year in the US alone. They don't appear to appreciate that doctors are using this as the pharmaceutical standard of care for myopia management, as opposed to the device standard of cares that are being used in glasses and contacts and MiSight and Stellus. So they don't appreciate that. And so it's pretty clear, since they weren't willing to dive into the data like everyone thinks they should have, that that they don't seem to care that much about it.
And that's why you're going back to them. And so there's still hope. It just means that there's got to be a lot of effort on your part should you decide to do that. And I think we're all championing that you should, but we're not the ones paying the bill.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So that's been what you've kind of been working on since October, head to the ground, trying to figure what that is. Is there anything that the Eyecare community, the myopia community can do? I know there's already been an outpouring. We've seen things on social media and, LinkedIn and so forth, but anything else that we can do to be supportive?
It's been amazing, the outpouring from the clinicians. They've been very involved, very supportive. They've been conducting a lot of social media posting, which is great. And what that does is that kind of creates awareness. And there were actually 2 clinicians, an optometrist and an ophthalmologist, that got together and they put a petition together on this website called change.org. And if you're interested in looking at it, you can go to change.org and just search atropine and you'll find it. But they put a petition together saying, there's something not right here, and we think the FDA needs to take another look. So if people are interested, then they can go that route, take a look at the petition, see if it's something they'd support. But really, it's continued awareness. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so we have to make sure that enough doctors are interested in an approved low-dose atropine product. From what we understand, there are a lot of doctors that are interested in that. So we think that it should be something the FDA takes an additional look at. And if this outpouring of support continues, then hopefully it'll be enough to get the attention of the FDA.
Yeah. Well, I know this wasn't as quick or was the outcome that you were hoping for, but we appreciate that you're struggling through it. I wish we were celebrating and that you were working hard in another area, but glad that our colleagues across the world are getting access to this, and we'll keep our ears out, and we'll be supporting you. And change.org and look for atropine, and we can do that for sure. So thanks for hanging out with us on the podcast, and thanks for sharing the insights of what's happening with Sydnexis.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's always good talking to you, and I wish you the best of luck in everything you do here.
Patrick's holding up the Myopia Podcast mug, which is just awesome. So thanks, bud. And thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned next time for more great content on myopia management. Well, I've been doing myopia management for 20 years. 3 years ago, we decided to go all in with our practice. And it was at that time that I decided to reach out to Treehouse Eyes and decided to start partnering with them. Over the years, we've been able to implement some incredible team training, some execution with our practice, partnering with them in clinical confidence to understand, to make sure that we're doing things the right way. What I'm really excited about is Treehouse has decided to change things up a little bit and start offering a more selective offering. Whether you decide that you want to go full service like we do in our practice, or maybe you want more focused efforts looking at their clinical outcomes, or maybe you want help with your team training, or how to execute things in your practice. There's a model that works for you. I wanted to bring up this update because I love working with Treehouse Eyes, but also if you're wanting to grow your practice in 2026 in the area of myopia management, now is the time to get on board. Check out in the link below the new offerings that Treehouse Eyes has to offer. And I think that we can take myopia to a new level if you can bring a little more precision, a little bit more clinical information, a little bit more marketing to your practice, and if your team can be a little bit better. All of those things can work to make a huge difference in the lives of your patients and in your practice and for you. Check out growmymyopiapractice.com.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you for tuning in to the Myopia Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please leave a 5-star review and don't forget to subscribe for more great episodes.